running around on stage with the Tesla stock price where the stock price had gone in half, and he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do! What a creep! What a jerk! Like who derives joy?
America is on the brink. The Nasdaq has collapsed by 20%. Trade with China has nearly halved. Billions of dollars in investments disappear in a matter of weeks. Factories in Detroit are shutting down. Workers in Iowa are packing the last boxes of personal belongings. Meanwhile, the President of the United States, instead of taking emergency measures, strolls leisurely across the White House lawn, choosing a place for a 30-meter flagpole. Symbolism instead of real solutions. The era of uncertainty has begun, and the blow to the U.S. economy has been greater than anyone realized
over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
At this moment, as companies flee overseas and allies turn to China and India, the US is losing not only control of trade, but the very basis of its power, trust. Following Canada, one by one, the world's largest economies are abandoning the dollar, transacting in yuan and rupees. More than $100 billion of long-term bonds have been sold in a matter of months. Financial markets are shaking, and instead of answers, America hears only new slogans of greatness.
That's from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. People just choosing with their wallets to not buy Teslas because of that Musk-Trump association. And actually here in London, an activist group called Everyone Hates Elon actually have been hacking bus stop signs with posters. I actually passed one yesterday. First, I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but it said the words 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. Illusion here, 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds or something. But this poster was alluding to the start of World War II, and the image was of Musk giving that hand salute that we saw at Trump's inauguration that many have attacked as a Nazi gesture. Musk, though, has neither admitted or denied what he was doing. But we're seeing the knock-on effect of that anti-Musk anger across Europe and in terms of sales.
But the most alarming thing is not the falling indexes or the depreciation of the currency. What is most frightening is the internal destruction. When major auto giants like John Deere and Ford close plants on home soil and move production to Mexico and Brazil, when Boeing, the symbol of American skies, cuts billions of dollars in orders because of absurd tariffs, and while entire industries are collapsing before our eyes, the president talks with a smile about a great revival, without noticing that the country is sliding into the abyss.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
What happened to the economy that the whole world once feared? Why are major corporations fleeing outside the US? And how did one political decision set off a chain reaction, the consequences of which we will see in the coming months? This is the story of an avoidable crisis, a great economy that became hostage to ambition, about how a symbolic flag became the last reminder of a country that forgot that strength is not in slogans but in deeds.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
Stay tuned to see how one mistake at the pinnacle of power can change the fate of millions of people. This is not a theory. This is reality unfolding right now, and the future of an entire world depends on whether America wakes up in time. America, once a symbol of stability and prosperity, is going through one of the strangest and most dangerous periods of its modern history. Investors are withdrawing assets in panic, indices are plummeting, businesses are shutting down en masse, and uncertainty and growing fear are rife across the country. The Nasdaq has collapsed 20% in just 3 months. The SP 500 has lost 15%, and the Dow Jones is down nearly 10%. Against this backdrop, the President of the United States appears on the White House lawn, not to make an urgent statement, not to propose anti-crisis measures, but to select a site for a new 100-foot flagpole. Time seems frozen in an absurd scene, where economic pillars are crumbling and the top leadership is preoccupied with symbols instead of saving reality.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
At a press conference that looked more like a play than a serious conversation, Trump cheerfully announced, "We are going to put up a beautiful flag, the tallest one, the best one." To clarifying questions about the market decline, he merely brushed off, saying that investors have themselves to blame for their own fear and that America always wins. These words hit the financial markets with a new blow. In the next 24 hours alone, $40 billion worth of capital flight was recorded, with some of this money going into the yuan, which seemed an impossible scenario not so long ago. However, the most serious threat came not from words, but from unpredictable actions. On the same day, Trump unexpectedly announced that he would not increase tariffs against China, adding a cryptic phrase, "We have to be flexible, very flexible." Too high a rate is not a good thing. Investors took this as capitulation. The dollar fell 3% overnight, and major financial publications ran headlines like "America loses economic leadership" and "Trump blinked first."
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
But as soon as the market began to adapt to the new line of behavior, a sharp reversal followed. Less than 24 hours later, the same president thundered that tariffs were the greatest economic weapon that could enrich the country. Investors were shocked. Wall Street was hit by a new wave of sell-offs. The VIX Volatility Index rose 48% in just 2 days, a record jump in 8 years. Across the country, companies began revising their plans, postponing expansions and laying off employees. Large funds like BlackRock and Vanguard formally warned clients of rising recession risks. At the same time, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a report that bluntly stated the U.S. could lose up to 1.5 million jobs by the end of the year due to unstable economic policies. According to their data, 25% of all small and medium-sized businesses have already experienced a sharp decline in orders, and 1 in 3 entrepreneurs have announced plans to downsize. The fictional but plausible reports of analytical agencies added, in the last week, the highest increase in the last 10 years in applications to employment centers was recorded, especially in the industrial belt of the USA, the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
Meanwhile, the situation on the foreign economic front worsened even faster. After the new tariffs were imposed, Chinese companies began to unwind contracts en masse, refusing to ship agricultural products, automobiles, and industrial goods from the United States. Officially, exports of U.S. goods to China fell 60% in 3 months. In reality, as anonymous sources from the Commerce Department reported, the real drop was all of 75%, taking into account undeclared contract failures.
Hey Diane, this investigation really just beginning, and one of the key elements will of course be the surveillance video, and investigators potentially have a lot of it to work with as they try to figure out what caused this fire. We know that surveillance footage has been turned over, including video from each of the cars, which could prove vital to understanding what happened here, because each vehicle has its own camera system that works even when the car is off, and 16 cars burned in this fire, and right now investigators don't know what caused it.
The blow to the US economy was not just painful, it was systemic. In 2 weeks, 25% of all scheduled shipping from the US, particularly from the major ports of Los Angeles and Houston, was cancelled. Ships stood for weeks in ports without cargo. Brokers in New York warned warehouses were jammed with unclaimed products, ranging from farm equipment to consumer electronics. The shortage of demand threatened to turn into a widespread economic collapse. And all of this was happening against a backdrop of Trump's endless declarations that America was on the road to greatness. He promised that the tariffs would make the country richer, that they would save jobs, that the dollar would become invincible. The reality, however, was quite different. Already in the first quarter of 2025, GDP growth slowed to 1.8%, according to official figures, while unofficial forecasts by independent analysts put the true figure closer to zero. A fictional but realistic survey by the American Retail Trade Association found more than 60% of respondents expect the economy to worsen in the next 6 months, a record high in the past 30 years. It was at this point that the second side of the disaster, the effects of the tariff war on the real economy, became most acute. While the president painted patriotic pictures of flags and triumphs, American corporations were counting losses. The auto industry, one of the country's prides, was under attack. The U.S. Auto Industry Association sent an urgent letter to the White House, warning that if the tariffs were not eliminated within 3 months, job losses could be as high as 2 million people. But instead of negotiations, the White House responded with a new package of restrictions.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
The effect was immediate. Companies like Ford, GM, and Chrysler began mass plant closures. A fictional but plausible story in Detroit, the largest truck assembly plant, employing 14,000 people, was completely shut down. The company's press office was careful to report a temporary suspension, but workers realized that what was temporary could easily become permanent.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
At the same time, consumer prices began to rise without restraint. Duties on steel, aluminum, electronics, and auto parts translated into higher product prices for end buyers. The cost of new cars rose an average of 18% in the first 4 months of 2025. Home appliances are up 12%. Everyday goods, from food to clothing, went up 8 to 10%. People began borrowing en masse for everyday expenses, further exacerbating the debt burden. Even crumbs of optimism were lost in this rapidly unfolding disaster. Small businesses, traditionally considered the heart of the American economy, were on the verge of extinction. According to plausible fictional statistics, in Texas, more than 2,500 small businesses closed in 2 months. And in Ohio, small business bankruptcies rose 72% over the same period last year. And all of this was happening against a backdrop of complete disorientation of the authorities. While Trump spoke of greatness and new heights about to be reached, ordinary Americans increasingly wondered, if the country was really winning, why were they losing their jobs? Why were prices rising? And why did the future seem increasingly bleak?
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say, the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker. But that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you'd see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
Against the backdrop of all these events, investors who had previously seen the US as a safe haven began to withdraw capital in a hurry. In April and May alone, US debt securities left investment portfolios worth more than $120 billion, breaking all previous anti-records. And if in public reports still sounded cautious wording about strategy review, behind closed doors there was a real flight. At fictitious meetings of major banks, they discussed not ways to protect assets in the US, but how to withdraw them faster, before the dollar finally loses its status as the world's reserve currency. The US Treasury Department tried to calm the markets by saying that the dollar remains the primary means of global settlement, but in reality the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The index of confidence in the US economy fell to a record 38 points, and major funds began hoarding gold, yuan, and even digital currencies, fearing the imminent collapse of the system. Fictional data from a Bloomberg Markets report indicated, for the first time in 40 years, more than 40% of large investors labeled the dollar a high-risk asset.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
While the economy was suffering from external pressures, an equally destructive political war was taking place internally. One of the most colorful figures in this new confrontation was Jasmine Crockett, a young and uncompromising congresswoman who unexpectedly became the voice of a frustrated America. On live TV, she literally destroyed Donald Trump and Elon Musk with her speeches, exposing their hypocrisy and political demagoguery. She did not hide her contempt for those who, instead of solving real problems, were engaged in building an illusory image of strong America, covering failures with bright slogans. In her fictional but realistic speech, Crockett accused Musk of turning his technology projects into tools for political games, and Trump of using faux patriotism as a shield for his economic failures. She did not hesitate to declare, "You are not building the future. You are destroying the present for the sake of your ambitions." The phrase went viral on social media with millions of reposts and came to symbolize the growing popular anger.
So there are a couple of things that might be going on here. So on the one hand, it could be that just at a very basic level, Musk has quickly observed a 40% decline in sales in Tesla in Europe.
In response to the allegations against Trump and Musk, Republican leaders tried to mount a counteroffensive. A fictional press conference was held in New York City, where the party's political technologists tried to portray everything that was happening as temporary difficulties and side effects of the great economic realignment. But even among their supporters, irritation was growing. Promises of a new industrial revolution were turning into rising unemployment, bankruptcies, and falling living standards. This was the beginning of a new wave of de-industrialization, far more devastating than the 2008 crisis. Large factories built back in the mid-20th century began to turn into ghosts, huge empty hulks where silence reigned instead of humming machines. Small businesses that served the giants of the automobile industry were also doomed. The disappearance of orders meant imminent bankruptcy. Car repair shops, logistics firms, part suppliers, all of them began to close their doors one by one. Workers who had recently believed in the revival of American industry now stood in long lines at job centers. Fictionalized local media reports told of former mechanics and engineers retraining as delivery men or laborers just to make ends meet. Fear of the future was becoming the new normal. An Economic Stability Institute study, fictional but logical, reported 58% of families in industrial states felt the threat of real poverty, for the first time in 30 years. And at that moment, when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, the next wave of crisis hit in the airline industry. Boeing, once an unshakable pillar of American technological superiority, was sucked into a deadly vortex. Faced with the threat of 200% tariffs on products manufactured outside the US, the company made a forced decision to move some assembly lines to Mexico and Brazil. This caused quite a shock in Seattle, where Boeing plants have been the heart of the economy for decades.
The market reacted with lightning speed. Boeing shares fell 8% in just 2 days after plans to relocate production were unveiled. Fictitious but realistic analysts noted that Boeing lost more than $12 billion in market capitalization in a single week. Instead of the promised flourishing of the aircraft industry, America got the collapse of one of its flagship industries. Meanwhile, competitors wasted no time. Airbus in Europe and China's Comac were rapidly increasing production capacity, offering customers cheaper and more affordable alternatives. In reality, Airbus has actually increased its global market share by 25% over the past 2 years. Fictitious forecasts, backed by the logic of what was happening, noted that by 2026, Boeing could lose its status as the leader of global aviation, ceding it for the first time to European and Chinese manufacturers. But the worst part was not even that. According to the reports, some based on real data, some enhanced by fiction, more than 2 million airplanes planned for sale by U.S. manufacturers through 2025 were in danger of being disrupted by rising prices and unstable tariff conditions. International airlines previously focused on Boeing began contracting, with Airbus and Comac en masse preferring stability to American political instability. And while industry leaders struggled to survive, another wave of populism was brewing on the political front. The Trump administration continued to insist that tariffs will save jobs, even as those very same workers marched in rallies demanding that their factories be saved. The fictional protests in Detroit, which drew more than 50,000 people, symbolized the growing gap between reality and rhetoric. All this took place in an atmosphere of appalling mistrust. America, which had prided itself on its industrial might, was rapidly turning into a country without factories, without jobs, without confidence in the future. Workers, investors, small businesses, they were all thrown into the storm while the political elite continued to paint non-existent pictures of the future in front of them. And if America used to boast of dictating terms to the whole world, now it had to struggle for basic survival in the global market. Boeing, John Deere, Ford, these were just the first swallows. They were followed by other companies that realized that patriotism could not cover losses, that slogans did not pay the bills, and that tariffs were not a weapon but a burden. And while other countries, from China to India, from Germany to Brazil, were consolidating their positions, America was trapped in its own ambitions and mistakes. The question was no longer one of greatness. It was a question of survival. And there was no answer yet.